Good morning, New York Giants fans, and welcome to your Valentine's Views podcast on this Tuesday morning. In some ways, it's a terrible Tuesday for the Giants after another embarrassing performance Monday night. But the flip side is you're up, you're awake, you're here, you're alive, the sun is out. So in that sense, not everything is bad, but sadly, your New York Giants are bad. And here to help me discuss the Giants and commiserate a little bit is Big Blue Views Tony DelGenio. Good morning, Tony. How are you?
Well, that's a loaded question.
Oh, it was a simple question. It's a loaded answer.
I'm surviving.
You're surviving. Yeah, as we all are. And I just want to let folks know if you're out there listening to our live stream, please feel free to drop some questions in, drop some comments in. We appreciate the input. And on a morning like this, we can probably use the topics to talk about. So please, drop your comments in if you have any. So Tony, let me start with this. To me, the Giants got destroyed week 1 by Dallas. They got overwhelmed week 3 by the San Francisco 49ers. But when I sit and I think about those 3 losses, last night for me feels worse than any of them. And I'll say this. Seattle is a team that doesn't have a roster that's that much better than the Giants. Maybe it's not better at all. They were missing their 2 starting offensive tackles last night. Their secondary was beat up. They kept making mistakes. They kept committing penalties. They committed 5 penalties on one series of offensive plays. They tried and tried and tried to allow the Giants into that game last night, and the Giants simply refused to accept the offer. For me, the embarrassing nature of losing to that team is worse than any of the other losses so far.
And not just losing to them, but losing to them 24-3. I mean, I wrote last night after the game that Seattle was begging the Giants to beat them. And the Giants refused to do it. And you just watched. I mean, every drive was, even in the first half, was just comical on both sides with all the mistakes that both teams were making. And finally, the Giants just out-mistaked the Seahawks by the second half, and it became a wrap.
Absolutely. And I have been sort of I don't like to go and put the coaching staff in the kudos and wet willies. I don't like to go down the road of being critical of the coaching staff. But Tony, my God, I mean, yes, the offensive line is full of backups, but it's completely non-functional. These guys don't have a clue who to block. The offense seems to have no plan. They either ignore the run completely or start out running the ball well and then just abandon it for no apparent reason. They seem determined. Brian Daboll seems determined to leave Daniel Jones in games until he gets killed. And they seem to have no idea how to get the ball to Darren Waller, no real idea how to get the ball to Jalen Hyatt. They can't even seem to get on the same page. There was a 3rd and 11 where Daniel Jones thought he was given a run call, and Brian Daboll said he was given a pass call. Mm-hmm. So we see special teams mistakes, penalties, undisciplined play. I'm shocked by this after the way the Giants played a year ago, the disciplined way, the mistake-free way they played a year ago. And it has to fall at the feet of the coaching staff. It just does.
It's hard for me to disagree with that statement. If this were the first year of the Brian Daboll regime, then we'd be talking about the Giants in the same way that people were talking about the Denver Broncos last year, with Nathaniel Hackett being a head coach who was in over his head and and a team that was just a mess from start to finish. Of course, Denver still looks like a team that's a mess from start to finish, even with Sean Payton there right now. But it's amazing after having seen a team that played to I think close to its capacity last season, but this season they're just totally disorganized, totally clueless about what they have to do. Obviously, injuries have played I think a big role in things, and no more any place else than the blocking. And last night we had a couple more injuries with John Michael Schmitz going out on the first series with a shoulder injury apparently, and then little remarked upon, but Daniel Bellinger also went out with apparently a knee injury after about 6 plays last night. So their only blocking tight end was gone too.
And Shane Lemieux as well. Shane Lemieux played, and of course Shane Lemieux didn't make it to the end of the game.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So it's just astounding how bad this team is playing right now.
Absolutely. And there's no way that I saw this coming. No way that you could have seen this. It feels like it's a better roster. It still feels like it's a better roster. The underbelly of it, the depth of it is still questionable. There are still holes. There are still things that need to be upgraded, maybe more than we thought. But this roster with Darren Waller, with Jalen Hyatt, with Paris Campbell, with a couple of the defensive additions that they've made, this roster is more talented than the one that the Giants fielded a year ago. I still believe that. It's not perfect. Shane made some mistakes in building it, I would think, and in the upcoming week I'll try to get into some of those. But it's astounding how poorly and how undisciplined this team is playing.
Yeah, and I would say not as much on the defensive side of the ball last night. Not that they played particularly well, but they finally got a little bit of a pass rush last night. They weren't awful in coverage. They still had their problems in tackling. I mean, the short pass to Noah Fant that wound up going for, 53 yards or something like that down the sideline, with Bobby Okereke missing yet another tackle, Dory Jackson missing a tackle. We're just seeing way too much of that from the Giants. We're not seeing what we needed to see from the new guys that they signed this year. The offensive line is I think the worst that I've ever seen anywhere, and it's hard to understand how it can be that much worse than last year and some of the lines the Giants have had in the past. And they're just not, and maybe it's because of the offensive line problems, but they're not even using players well. You mentioned Paris Campbell. I think, did you mention Paris Campbell? I can't remember.
I did mention Campbell, but
there was one play I saw a clip on Twitter from Brian Baldinger early in the game, first drive, and the Giants are in max protect, and they're keeping Paris Campbell in to block also, along with Bellinger, and so on and so forth.
Double super secret max protection. That didn't work anyway.
It didn't work anyway. Well, and as he pointed out, there's nobody to catch the ball out there, so Jones has to just dump it off, because all Seattle has to do is cover 2 guys, and there's nobody else to throw to. So when you're keeping Paris Campbell in to protect, things are bad. And of course, then the one time Jones did throw to Paris Campbell last night on the goal line, he should have thrown to Darren Waller instead.
Yeah. It's just mystifying how there seems to be no plan, no cohesion, no organization, nothing. But Tony, let's talk about Daniel Jones. And just like I've been a defender of the coaching staff, you just can't defend what you saw last night. I can't defend Brian Daboll. I can't defend Mike Kafka. I can't defend Bobby Johnson. As Brian Baldinger pointed out, The Seattle Seahawks had a banged up offensive line with a bunch of backups in, and they managed to be functional against Wink Martindale's blitzing schemes. The Giants aren't functional on the offensive line. I can't defend Bobby Johnson, from that, but really what I want to talk about right now is Daniel Jones. We have to talk about the way that Jones played. And the scary part for me last night, before I give a whole lot of thoughts about Daniel Jones, I'm going to let you take the floor. But the scary part for me last night was I saw regression to first and second year Daniel Jones. I think there are reasons for it, but I saw that kind of regression, and I don't know at this point, the way things are going, I'm not sure it's fixable.
Yeah, so I think that Daniel Jones is a good quarterback. I really think, and I think he can be a very good quarterback, but he is not a great quarterback. And I think there are maybe a small number of quarterbacks in the NFL who can stand in the face of constant breakdowns on the offensive line and still function. But Jones is not one of them. I think Jones is somebody who needs a decent pocket and needs some time to throw before doing things. And to me, and of course I'm reading into what I'm seeing with my eyes, and I don't know whether it's correct or not, but I believe that what happens to Daniel Jones is that he is so shell shocked now, expecting to see the pressure within a second or two, that he's not even attempting to look for any downfield reads, and he's always picking up, I think, the short route and the first read, and if the first read looks to him like it's open, then that's what he's doing, and he's not asking whether there's a better read out there that he could be taking. It was pretty damning last night when I think it was Devin Witherspoon was interviewed after the game, and he told the reporter that they were told during practice this week that Daniel Jones likes to lock onto his first read. So hit that and go for that. And so when the other team has diagnosed that about you, it tells you that something is wrong. And certainly the interception by Witherspoon at the goal line on the pass that was intended for Campbell, and it wasn't even thrown well to Campbell in the first place. But the fact that pass was intercepted when Darren Waller was wide open at the back of the end zone, I think that's an example of how he's just gotten jumpy, I think, back there behind the line. He's going back and saying, is there some place I can get rid of the ball to? And that's always going to be the short man, and never looking downfield. So any chance the Giants have to construct an offense that opens up the field, I believe he's taking away from himself, because he's gotten so gun shy about whether he's going to have the time to do it before he gets whacked.
Before I talk about Jones, I will say one other thing. Another thing that Devon Witherspoon said last night was that the Seattle Seahawks knew on that goal line play on his 97-yard interception. He said the Seattle Seahawks knew the play, and they knew where the ball was going to go as soon as the Giants lined up. They knew from the formation exactly where the ball was going to go. So Witherspoon just ran to the spot where he knew the ball was going to be thrown, and Jones threw a bad ball, and it was 7 points for Seattle. And that is an indictment of the coaching staff, of the game plan, of the scheme. If teams can simply look at formation, down, and distance and know what you're going to run, then that's awful. And that is something that did not happen last year with the Giants. And it is mystifying with the same coaching staff, with supposedly better weapons, with tremendous offensive minds like Brian Daboll and Mike Kafka. It's mystifying that things like that can happen. But back to Daniel Jones, you're absolutely right. I believe that what we saw last night was an accumulation of what we saw, of what happened to Jones the first 3 weeks. Constant pressure, constantly being hit, constantly having to get out of the pocket. And what happens after a while, we've seen it happen to quarterback after quarterback after quarterback in the history of the NFL. After a while, you don't trust what's in front of you. You don't trust what's about to happen. Nobody likes to get hit by 280, 300-pound men, coming at you full speed. And he's getting hit time after time after time. 10 sacks last night, 14 quarterback hits. I don't know how many times he got out of the pocket when there was pressure. Even entering last night, he'd been hit on or pressured on 47% of his dropbacks, which is just ridiculous and way above last year. He's playing badly. I think last night we saw regression with his ball handling on the strip sack. He didn't protect that ball. We saw regression in the fact that he held the ball a couple times and didn't get rid of it. He was frustrated, looking for something to happen, and should have just thrown the ball away a couple times. The Paris Campbell play was bad, and I think you're right. It's like the first thing he saw was where the ball was going to go. And if he throws a good ball, maybe that's still a touchdown.
Yeah.
And the second interception, you could see it coming because you could see his feet get jumpy. You could see him double clutch and triple clutch and then just throw the ball. Right. And he threw it to nowhere. There was no Giant who had any prayer of catching that football. And I am with you. I think Daniel Jones is and can be a good quarterback. But I think that what we're seeing is just an accumulation of all of the bad around him just beginning to drag him down. He is not a guy who, except for sometimes with his legs, he's not a guy who's going to lift the play of the team around him. He's a guy who needs that offensive line to function. He needs the coaching staff to remember that they have running backs on the roster. He needs the wide receivers to make a play once in a while. And those things aren't happening. And I think we're seeing regression from Jones. And it's scary because the road ahead, Miami and Buffalo, is not easy. You're staring at 1-5. You're staring at Washington and Dallas after that. And this could get really, really ugly. It's ugly now, but this could completely come apart at the seams.
Yeah, I mean, and I think you look at last night's game and you say, wow, the Giants are going to have a top 10 draft pick again.
Maybe top 5.
And maybe top 5. And you say, well, are they in the Caleb Williams sweepstakes? And if they were in position to take Caleb Williams, would Caleb Williams decide to go back to school if the Giants were the team drafting number 1? But right now, I mean, I laugh when I watch teams like the Chicago Bears playing because they're another team rebuilding that seems right now to be completely inept. But I have to admit, looking at the Giants last night, the Giants don't look any better than the Chicago Bears right now.
No,
better than the Denver Broncos.
We expected, I think, everybody who was realistic perhaps expected some regression. All right, at least regression record-wise, because of the increased difficulty of the schedule. 4 out of 5 games on the road in the first 5 weeks. The quality of the opposition that the Giants had to play at the beginning of the season. I think we expected some regression record-wise. I don't think we expected this kind of regression in play. I don't think that Giants players expected this kind of regression either. And I think they're shocked. We're shocked. It's I see comments here in the stream about the fact that the Giants had 11 days to prepare, and that's true. And it's just to come out and once again lay an egg in the first half, to be awful in the first half, to not have a clue, and it's mystifying to me, the way that the Giants are playing, especially with that kind of time to prepare. So I don't know. I don't know where things go from here, but it's certainly not good.
No, I think we're facing some dark times right now with the Giants, and obviously they've been hurt by injuries, and that hasn't helped. But
But it's
Seattle,
beyond that. It's just
it's beyond that. Seattle is hurt by injuries too. Seattle put up a makeshift offensive line last night, and they did fairly well. I mean, they didn't play great, but they did fairly well. They kept a lot of the pass rush off Geno Smith last night. The Giants just don't seem functional, and I have no answers as to how this team can be largely the same team that played so well last season, and it's completely mystifying to me. The same coaching staff. I guess they had to replace the running backs coach, but the Giants don't run the ball, as you say, after the first drive anyway. So the running backs,
right. But the key coaches are all the same.
The key coaches are all the same, and yet they look completely different. Thinking about, they used a lot of quick game last year too, especially early in the season, before things solidified for them. But we saw all of that creativity, all of the interesting plays that people were praising Kafka and Dable about, that were making the most of subpar talent on a team to still confuse opposing defenses and move the ball down the field and score a reasonable amount of the time. We're not seeing any of those interesting plays this year.
No, we're not.
Yeah.
And the other thing that we saw again last night for the umpteenth time is atrocious, embarrassing special teams play. 7 penalties, 6 accepted because there were 2 on one play, a muffed punt, a 23-yard punt return allowed, on top of a 10-yard penalty on top after that, added to that 23-yard punt return. I mean, special teams is kind of a microcosm of the entire roster and everything else, but it continues to be an embarrassment for the Giants. Even when they put Adoree Jackson in the game to return punts, he fair caught one, and then he basically ran away from the ball on every other punt and let it roll 15 or 20 yards. And that was kind of embarrassing too. It's just, the defense was marginally better last night. It was better. They basically allowed 10 points. The other 14 came as, results of the interception and the Jones fumble. But still, you can't allow Noah Fant to tiptoe down the sidelines for 51 yards. Somebody has to knock that man out of bounds. And, how he managed to run by Giants defenders the way he did, I'll never know. But, Tony, here's the thing. The other thing that I think we want to talk about before we call it a day. I was in the locker room last night, and I didn't get a chance to talk to Xavier McKinney, but McKinney talked about the fact that he's been on teams where it's all come apart at the seams before. Adoree Jackson talked about that kind of stuff. Dexter Lawrence was talking about needing to possibly hurt some people's feelings to get some guys to play better, prepare better, whatever it takes. When guys were asked about coaches, and I asked a few guys, last week about coaches, but when a couple of guys were asked about coaching, there was silence. Dexter Lawrence was asked about Wink Martindale last night, and I've defended Wink, and Wink's been a terrific coordinator for a long time, but Dex was asked about Wink, and it took him a long time to answer the question. And all of that just leads me to think that this is a very, very dangerous time for the New York Giants. I think there's dissension in the room, whether it's between coaches and players, whether it's player to player. You get the feeling that this team isn't as together as it was a year ago. You get the feeling that there's some guys looking cross-eyed at some of the other guys in the room. Nobody's directly pointing fingers, but you just get the feeling that this might all come apart. And I never thought that it would with Brian Daboll, the way that things went last year. And as hard as he works to build relationships, I never thought that would happen. But it's very scary right now, because you get the feeling that this thing could all come apart at the seams. And that's just bad. I can't imagine having, being back in this situation of having to start over with another new coaching staff. I can't even fathom that. I don't think it's going to happen. But having been in that room last night, I just feel like there's potential for this to come apart.
Well, that's pretty disturbing to hear as someone on the outside. But I guess in another way, though, it's not surprising to hear when you see how poorly they're playing across the board. You can imagine that finger pointing is going to start to occur. And naturally, the scariest thing is that the next 2 weeks, they have games that they weren't expected to win anyway. And you can imagine that those could be really embarrassing blowout games, either or both of them. And if that begins to happen, then you wonder what that locker room is like. And I couldn't have imagined the possibility of Brian Daboll not surviving his second season as coach and coming back for a third year. I mean, I thought they had a head coach in place for the next 10 years, but
I still can't.
Yeah, I know. I can't either yet someone is not doing a good job. And I don't know. I don't know, where it is. I mean, you have to say they're poorly coached when you watch the way they play. These past, few, and last night especially. I mean, I think last night was really their worst game of the season, because
absolutely
they looked awful against a team that's not very good. I mean, Seattle might make it to the playoffs this year, but the Seattle is not a team that, if last night is an indication, Seattle is not a team that deserves to be in the playoffs.
No.
Yet they I don't want to say they dominated the Giants, but they were able to easily defeat them on a night that they looked bad themselves. And that really tells you something about how bad the Giants are right now. And it's hard to imagine that this coaching staff could put a product out there like that, yet that's what's happening. And I'm at a loss to understand or explain it.
You and me both. The Giants ran 75 offensive plays last night. The Seattle Seahawks ran 55. And yet the score was 24-3 Seattle, and the game wasn't competitive after midway through the third quarter. That's just flabbergasting.
Mm-hmm.
You talked about those two games that the Giants have coming up. And I will say this on kind of a personal note. The Bills Stadium in Orchard Park is about 2 miles away from a college called Hilbert College, all right, which is basically right around the corner, obviously. And that's where my son went to school. My son played soccer for Hilbert College for 4 years. I have been planning on considering going to that game in Buffalo, basically just because it's an area that I'm familiar with. It's an area that I'm comfortable with. It's an area I kind of wanted to I wouldn't mind spending a little bit of time in. But I was thinking last night, why am I going to bother making that 5-hour drive both ways? Why am I going to do that? So I might just stay home, because it's just not worth going, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
If I don't have to go, why should I go?
Yeah. there's no reason to want to watch it. I mean, I'll continue to watch them, of course, but you feel like there's no reason to watch them anymore because it feels like their season is over. And how can you imagine saying that after 4 games? It looks like their season is over. It's just
No,
astounding.
it is absolutely astounding. Nobody saw this coming, especially with this coaching staff, especially with a better roster. Tony, we're at a loss. I think we could continue to spin our wheels and talk in circles, but I think we've pretty much said what needs to be said at this point. So, folks, we'll call it a show. Hopefully, someday we'll have something better to talk about. But please, continue to read our stuff at Big Blue View. Continue to follow us at Big Blue View on Twitter. Continue to check out our YouTube channel for as much Giants content as you can stomach at this point in the season, the way things are going. So thank you, as always, for listening. Please stay safe out there. Take care of each other, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.